Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
Hey, it's me, Egbert. E-G-G-B-U-R-T. Check out my website at egbert.com. Now it's back to those two dudes who told me they would bring in big ratings. They better are their history. Here are Brad and John.
Man, with all the things that have been happening lately, we had better perform. Otherwise, we are gone, right? John,
now, Brad, you're coming in super distant for me, and I'm getting a big echo here.
Okay, hold on. How about that? Is that better?
Yeah, I can hear you a little bit better now.
Okay, I'm doing a couple little different things here. That sound better to you then?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. The reason I did that is because what I don't want you to miss is things like this.
You shall feel the wrath of Hulkamania.
That's what I don't want you to miss.
I was hoping we'd hear some initials MEC already this early in the show, Brad, but
so early in the show? Do you mean?
Yeah, I figure it doesn't take long for me to say something incorrect, Brad.
I don't even know where to start from all of the things that have been said that are just wrong.
How about that?
There we go. You better have your finger on that trigger, Brad.
I do.
You're not Ric Flair.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, with the exception of my father, Brad, from the ages of 0 to, I don't know, puberty, the two leading male influences besides my father were, in order, Hulk Hogan and then Ric Flair.
Hulk Hogan, I pulled those bites. I did this over the weekend for you because of the fact you're such a little
Thank you,
wrestling
Brad.
fan. Because everybody else does all sorts of crazy drops, and I think to myself,
Why don't we?
Let's have Mary Elizabeth Coleman. Listen to this combination. We now have drops from Mary Elizabeth Coleman, Hulk Hogan, and Ric Flair. I mean,
yeah, they're all champions if you ask me.
Right. Okay. So the interesting part of this is that I'm watching this video. I pulled those from a video where he's being interviewed by Mean Gene. Whatever happened to Mean Gene? Remember Mean Gene?
Yeah, Mean Gene did pass away, and he was one of the first. What people don't know, Brad, is that he was one of the first personalities to jump from the AWA, which was based in Minnesota. When Vince McMahon started buying up these different territories, Gene Okerlund, just the announcer, was one of the first guys to jump from Minnesota over to what we colloquially call New York. Vince McMahon's operation.
Really? Now, and he was there. He was there for a number of years, right?
Yeah, I would say Gene came over probably circa 83, and then he left and went to Ted Turner's operation, WCW, circa, I would say, ballpark, maybe 95, something, 94, 95.
But he's no longer with us.
Correct. Yeah, he has passed away.
I always got a kick out of the fact when he did the interviews, he always looked at the camera looking like, I can't believe this guy's not hitting me yet. You know what I mean?
I know. And one of the gems of YouTube, which I have pulled clips from this and put this on when I tweet headlines out, I'll usually put it like a wacky clip. There's about a 6-minute reel of Mean Gene of all the outtakes from the interviews where guys break character, or where guys, and there's a couple clips where Mean Gene references guys missing interviews in St. Louis. They're just phenomenal.
Interesting. Okay, that's John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. He, among other things, puts together a daily list of all the things going on in the state of Missouri, politically, governmentally, and typically 20, 30, sometimes even 40 different things in that list. But we come to you every morning, just a little bit after 7 o'clock, and we give you the top 3. And who do we have doing the top 3 intros?
I'm Casey Kasem.
And he starts us off by saying,
We're on our way to the number 1 in 3rd place.
A follow-up from a Jay Ashcroft story from, I don't know, probably 4 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, Brad. Folks will probably remember when Jay Ashcroft got swatted at his home. Remember that?
Right. And for those of you who don't know what swatting is, that's when someone calls the police on someone else saying, like, there's a mass murder going on at this house, and they send the SWAT team in.
That's right. Yeah. And it can be a frightening experience for everybody. And it's often a way to threaten or intimidate people that you view as your, personal enemies or political enemies, something of that regard. Uniquely, that same week that happened, and it was coincidentally, it wasn't cause and effect, but that same week, a state representative from Carrollton, Missouri, in the western part of the state, a woman named Peggy McGaugh, introduced legislation. She's been a longtime elections expert. She introduced an elections bill that fittingly would make certain harassment, threatening statements against elected officials, guys like Jay Ashcroft, or even county election workers. She would expand the definition of what's considered, harassment of them, what's considered an election offense. In other words, if you are an election worker or you're working somewhere, even just for one day on election day, and you are threatened or your life is in danger, someone says they're going to assault you, things of that nature, it would be classified as I'm bringing up Representative McGaugh's bill here, House Bill 2140. It would essentially expand the list of offenses that have to do with threatening or intimidating election workers. And uniquely, one of the things that probably helps her bill is that high-profile swatting of Jay Ashcroft. So Representative McGaugh, the news piece of this is that Representative McGaugh was on KREX, KWIX, which is based in Moberly, Missouri, and did a brief interview there talking a little bit about that election legislation.
Yeah, but isn't it already illegal to do that? Like if you're...
It is, and that's the unique thing about this bill is that if one of the provisions, if felony is committed, as it reads in Representative McGaugh's bill. So if that threatening or intimidation leads to a felony, leads to a certain type of offense, like a certain type of assault, that assault would be considered now a felony versus whereas before it may have been considered something less.
Well, I see right now, if I dialed 911 and I tell them, I give your home address and I said, John is trapped, someone that he grabbed off the street and he's threatening to kill her, and the police show up at your place and they trace my number back on the 911 call, I'm already in trouble, right?
Right. And I know, and Brad, you've talked before about how the issue that you have with hate crimes and that a crime is a crime is a crime. I do think that for example, assaulting a law enforcement officer is different than assaulting a civilian. I think the penalties for that are different, right?
Well, and I can see that, but I think the whole thing, when you try to embellish these crimes just because they're perpetrated on someone, doesn't that sort of give you the idea that like what they're doing is they're protecting an elite class? In other words, once again, I give the example. If I do a swatting on you, they're going to come after me, and maybe maybe get a misdemeanor charge or something like that. But if I do a swatting on Jay Ashcroft or Bill Eigel or Mike Kehoe, then they're going, oh my God, he's threatening a government official.
And I should point out too, and Peggy McGaugh points out in the interview, that the first offense, Brad, is still, of those lower level things, is still considered a misdemeanor. So the first offense is a misdemeanor. And then something that would result in, bodily harm or death, I believe is called out by the bill, would have an increased penalty. Now, Brad, to give a social justice warrior take on this, what about the folks that work at polling places? If you work in North City and you're a 60-year-old black woman and you work at a polling place for one day and some angry right-wing journalist comes in and threatens you or starts a fight with you, don't you deserve to be a protected class, Brad? Even though you're an election worker just on that one day?
Well,
so,
Jeff,
I mean, I see your point about this. This could appear to be protecting the elites, but every election day, a lot of non-elite people volunteer their time and their treasure, Brad, to sit with other old people behind a desk and process voter registrations.
Boy, John, you know how to pick on the classes, don't you? Old
Thank
people, you. A black lady from North City. I mean, what about a rich young lady from Ladue who's working at the polls? That doesn't exist. You don't have rich young ladies working at the polls from Ladue? We don't have that?
Well, yeah, and if you have a specific address, I'd like to stop by on Election Day, Brad, and say hi.
So here's the only problem.
What's the status of her 401k? What's she up this year? Well, maybe we could compare notes, and I can see if I'm interested.
Here's the only problem with this law is, once again, it's just like, okay, leave it alone. I mean, and not only that, How are they going to find the guy who swatted John Ashcroft? Or Jay Ashcroft. How are they going to do that? They're probably not.
Well, you know what? If that guy was featured in a technology that's story number 1, Brad, I bet the authorities would be able to track him.
He's hinting, so let's move on.
Up a notch to number 2.
Filing ends soon. I believe it's tomorrow in Jefferson City, Brad, for certain elected offices. I believe filing ends on Tuesday. And it's rare that in our top 3, I don't talk about a news story that comes from a newspaper, a television station, or a radio station, or a website. But this comes directly from Scott Fawn of the Missouri Times. And he tweeted last night that Speaker of the House, Dean Plocher, who has to this point announced his intention to run for lieutenant governor, could pivot, Brad, to the Secretary of State's race. Now, that would be quite a shakeup. That would shake up the field quite a bit. Dean Plocher's got a lot of money. The Secretary of State, perhaps he feels that that's a softer field to compete in. Let's remember that last week, Caleb Rowden announced that he would not be running for Secretary of State. So that, that leaves one vacancy of a spot that had been taken before. So we'll see. It'll happen. It'll have to happen very soon because filing ends tomorrow.
And now, number 1.
The number 1.
The top story today is from the Springfield News Leader. Now, Brad, we've referred to them before as the Springfield Queer Leader because they're such a friend of the queer community. And in fact, today they led with a story that involves the queer community and a couple key players in the queer community. The catch is, Brad, as you know, and as we talked about on this show, there are some people out there that are trying to ban TikTok. And they say that its affiliation with the Chinese government could have negative effects on American security and Americans' personal information. But thankfully, 2 reporters at the Springfield News Leader have done a piece on how the queer community, Brad, is affected in a positive way by TikTok. And one of the gentlemen who's featured there is a guy named Aaron Shakura, not to be confused with the hip-swiveling seductress known as Shakira. But Shakura started a company called Queerly Caffeinated. And Brad, 75% of the sales that he claims to get on his coffee come from TikTok, Brad. That's I'm sure the fact that it's a round number isn't just completely made up. I'm sure it's completely legitimate. And also there's another content creator named Mac Ngimi who the pronouns are she, and I'm guessing it might be a biological I don't know. It's the pronouns are she, and this is a content creator, and a TikTok ban would negatively impact her livelihood. She's a TikTok influencer, Brad, and sometimes as I understand it in this piece, she gets trinkets or clothing or something to do her thing on TikTok. So we should really consider this, Brad. There's been a lot of debate as it relates to TikTok about how it would affect national security, how it would affect free speech. A lot of us, myself included, are worried about the free speech aspect. But let's take a minute, thanks to the Queer Leader, and think about how it might affect the LGBTQIA asterisk community, Brad.
Okay.
And those are the top 3 stories.
Let me ask you a question, okay? Once upon a time, I ran a company in Springfield. I didn't live there, but I spent a lot of time there, okay? Springfield was widely considered to the point, matter of fact, a lot of people referred to it as the buckle of the Bible Belt. What the heck happened? What's going on in Springfield?
Well, Brad, I think that probably 20 years ago, you had reporters that reflected the community and reflected the interests and the concerns of the community. And now, thankfully, Brad, journalists are content creators. So they can – now, remember, one of the authors of the story was Greta Cross. And you'll recall we talked about Ms. Cross earlier, probably 2 months ago. She's the one that's putting together that podcast series on Springfield's unique drag community, Brad, and how drag performers in these tiny little towns across Trump territory are standing tall against oppression, Brad. So thankfully, even though you remember Springfield being a conservative area, and I mean, technically, they still vote for all Republicans, and Donald Trump will win by 25 points, if not more. Thankfully, we have a content-creating community via the Springfield Queer Leader that can highlight more queer stories, Brad.
Okay, once again, I say what we should do is we should get a bunch of guys that work out at the gym all the time. You know, guys sort of like this.
And you shall feel the pythons, brother.
A guy who's got 25-inch biceps, and we should have it called Real Man Story Hour, where these
I love that. Or I like your original Masculinity Monday.
Masculinity Monday, where these guys show up at libraries and they go into schools and they go, "Hey, you little kids, we're going to tell you how to be a man. Yeah, man, real man."
That's right. And you know what? And that way, so here's the thing, Brad. Best case scenario, they grow up, or even let's say they go through puberty, and they're hanging out at their girlfriend's house, and they hear a scream. They know, Spider, I'm the one that's going to kill it. You know, their girlfriend takes all the, we can do it too. Anything a boy can do, we can do, except for kill spiders or answer the door late at night. See, they would step up, Brad. I love your idea.
I see, but once again, if you did that, like let's say if I got off the air this morning and I called up, let's say Francis House School District, and I said, "Hey, look, I got a bunch of guys that I know that work out at the gym, and we'd like to come in and have a Masculine Monday celebration, and we want to tell everybody how the real men the boys should go to the gym and they should work out, but yet they should be chivalrous to the point where if there is a woman in distress, they would essentially, defend her. If there was a fight going on, or some kind of a situation where a woman was in danger, that they would step forward. And in the old days, he would take off his coat if she was walking across the street.
Absolutely,
remember that? And there was a puddle in the street that could get her shoes dirty. The man would take off his jacket, put the jacket in the puddle, and let her walk on his jacket, thereby keeping her feet from getting, or her shoes from getting soiled. I mean, and they'd go like, "Yeah, right, not going to happen." Click. Right?
Absolutely. Well, two things, Brad. First of all, in the modern era, it's even more important to put your jacket down for women, because half of the women walking around are wearing Crocs. And, if they step in a puddle, Brad, that water's going to get on their toes and make them even more stinky than they are today. Secondly, you mentioned Hulk Hogan and his 24-inch pythons. Thankfully, at Planet Fitness, Brad, any man can go into a gym and pull out his python, and it's just fine. You can go into a women's locker room and pull out your python, and nobody's going to complain.
I'm not going to touch
And I mean
that.
Biceps. When I say pythons, I mean biceps, Brad.
I'm not going to
To quote Ice Cube, never picked up a book, but my arms are 16 inches. Bleeps, look.
I'm not going to touch that, okay?
Well, Brad, that's not what she said.
Boy, John's in a mood this morning, isn't he? Okay, we'll start off the next break by talking about TikTok. And there's an interesting story with TikTok, which, once again, remember what I say about freedom, John.
It's messy, Brad. That's
messy.
One of my favorite Brad catchphrases.
But
freedom is messy.
Freedom is messy. If you give people freedom, I shouldn't even say, I would say a good 90+% of people will not take advantage of it. But there's always the small percentage that will go, well, if that means I got freedom, I can do this.
And that's right, Brad.
Right. And once again, the problem with that is the reaction is that lawmakers, like what's the lady's name who's trying to do the swatting thing? What's her name again?
Oh, Peggy McGaugh.
She is trying to put her finger in the dike, so to speak, because there's
Brad, come on now.
Well, there's a leak. She's trying to plug the leak of one thing happened to Jay Ashcroft, so we're going to put in a new law, and that's what happens. Okay.
Well, it wasn't cause and effect. Remember, she pointed that out. That happened the same week. It wasn't cause and effect, though.
So now hold it. She put the thing in before the Jay Ashcroft deal?
Yeah, that was the point I made, was that it was coincidentally. She had already had that bill, and then that week, Jay Ashcroft got swatted.
Maybe
it was not in response to Jay Ashcroft's incident.
You ever thought about maybe she's the one that did it?
Ooh, she might be. I mean, gosh, if you saw her with her stack of papers when she goes on Scott Fawn show, surely there's a swatting plan in there.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?